Behind the scenes, I've added a little bit of styling to our To-Dos app, and you can see now at the top there's a breadcrumbs bar. In this video, I'm going to show you how we can use layouts to achieve a dynamic breadcrumbs bar at the top. So when I click on an individual to-do, you can see the breadcrumb changes, and we can now see that we're on the Use Iron Router task, and I can easily go back to the home page. At the end of this video, you should have a better understanding of layouts, yield regions, content for, and dynamic layouts. I've gone over to the Bootstrap page. We're using a slightly older version of Bootstrap, version 2.3.2 for this class. And what we're going to do is to use the breadcrumbs control. And so over here, you'll see the HTML that we can use to create a breadcrumb area that looks kind of like this. I've opened up the template file for our master layout. And if you look inside of the template, you can see that there's this thing called a yield. What this does is it creates something called a yield region. And since we didn't specify any name here, we call this the main yield. What goes in here into this area is our child template that gets rendered for a particular route. We can create other yield regions that are named. For example, we might create a footer or breadcrumb yield region. So let's do that now. I'll use Bootstrap to style a new row, and then we'll create the breadcrumb unordered list. And again, I'm just taking this right off of the Bootstrap website. And we'll create a default link for the home link. And so I'll say path for, and the route that this home link is going to be is to-dos index. And then just following the instructions from Bootstrap, I can create a special span with a class of divider. And that will give me the divider there. Now what I want to do here is let the child template render in some additional items in this breadcrumb list. So I don't know what those are yet. The child template will tell me because it could change depending upon the child template that's been rendered. So I can use another kind of yield, which is called a named yield. And the way I do that is I say yield, and then region equals, and then I just give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it breadcrumbs. And then I'll press save. At this point, I've pulled up the browser and fired up our application so we can see what we're doing. It looks like we did this correctly so far. You can see the breadcrumbs list at the top, and I can click the home link to get back home. But when I click on a particular to-do, I'd like the breadcrumbs bar to update dynamically based on the to-do item that I'm currently on. And I'd like to put that content right here. So what we're going to do is to go into our to-dos detail template, and we're going to generate some content that will go here. Over in the To-Dos detail template, the way that I can do this is by using a special block helper that's provided to you with Iron Router. It's called content for. The content for requires an attribute called region, and we specify the region that this content is for. In this case, the region is going to be for breadcrumbs. And then whatever content we put inside of this will go into that area. So we can just type test and make sure that we get something over in the browser. Okay, so let's style this up a little bit. What we want to do is to create a list item. We'll mark it as active. And inside, we'll just put the subject for now. Great, so over in the right now, you see that the title of the to-do shows up in the breadcrumbs dynamically. So if I go back to the home page and then click another to-do, the yield region gets updated with the content provided by the To-Dos detail template. So I found that once you start building larger applications, using layouts with content for and yield is a really useful technique. Now some routes may not want a breadcrumb area. So you might have multiple layouts in your application, which we'll do next. For example, EventedMind has at least 4 different layouts. Before we go too much further, let's just commit our changes. And then what we can do is to add a new layout. So I'll use the M command line tool again for scaffolding, and we'll generate a view. We just generate a view here because there's really no difference between a layout and a view other than the fact that we can use yield regions. And so we'll generate a view, and I'll put it in the layouts directory, and we'll call it something like no breadcrumbs. And if I go back over and refresh this, we should see that we have a new view in our layouts directory called no breadcrumbs. And what we can do here is, I'm just going to copy over the master layout. Except we'll get rid of the breadcrumbs area. And press save. By default, all of our routes are going to use the master layout as specified here in our router configuration. But we can override that for a particular route just by changing the options. So I could just say layout template is something else, like, for example, the no breadcrumbs. Now, if you have a small application, you can put options directly in the routes like this, but I find that it gets a little bit cumbersome to continue to do that if the application gets very large. So instead, what I'd recommend is you go into the controller for the particular route and put it there. So in this case, I've gone into the client folder and navigated down into the to-dos detail controller. And we can just provide an option right here called layout template, and we'll say no breadcrumbs, and press save. Now over on the right, you'll see that the default layout is with breadcrumbs, and if I click on a particular to-do, the breadcrumbs go away, and that's because we've overridden the default layout with the no breadcrumbs layout as an option on our route controller. Before we conclude, let me show you one last thing. That's how you can set the layout dynamically in your action function. I'm going to get rid of the option and then scroll down into the action function. You can call this .layout and then specify any template you'd like to set the layout dynamically. So let's again set it back to no breadcrumbs and press save. And now you can see the layout has been updated. So this can be useful for things like showing one layout if the user is logged in and another layout if they're not. In this video, we looked more closely at layouts and how we can use named yield regions to inject dynamic content into our layouts for different routes. Then we looked at how we can set different layouts for different routes by setting the layout template option. And finally, we looked at how we can set a layout dynamically inside of our code.